Okay, welcome to the panel on the state of Greek-Turkish relations, looking to the future. The panel's title tells us what we are going to be preoccupied today. We are not going to talk or re-talk what happened in the past, hopefully. We'll be starting what's happening today and then look into the future. What we are proposing, or what I'm proposing, and the panelists have agreed, that we'll have 2 rounds of like 5-6 minutes of speeches, 2 different questions. Then we'll open up for the discussion. We have 4 people, but 1 is online, if we manage that. Actually, today we have 4 seasoned experts on Greek-Turkish relations and different aspects of it. They have been engaged on and off for this topic. And some of us in this panel also have active role, right, in second-track diplomacy as well. They don't need to be introduced in length because I think you can find their bios in the program. I'll introduce them one by one when we come to them, listen to them individually. But I'll start with Paulina Lampsa. She is also, anybody who works on Greek-Turkish relations forever knows her.
Forever.
She has been one of the fixtures of Greek-Turkish relations for years. So very experienced and I would call a friend as well.
So we can blame her for the non-resolution.
Exactly, I can do that. I can do that as well. But for that, I'm going to blame you. So the first question that I like to ask panelists, each of them get their views, like as I said, 5-6 minutes, is how do they assess the Greek-Turkish relations today? And what are the main driving forces or determinants of this relationship today? Then in the next round, we'll look into the future. Now, let's start with Paulina.
Yes, thank you very much, Mustafa, and I want to thank also the organizers for this panel. So this is not a very much difficult question, I would say. Just we need to do a flashback and go back to 2022. If we go back to 2022, and we read the international press at this moment, we would see that there were a lot of articles saying, is it going to happen a war between Greece and Turkey? The situation was extremely tense, both in the rhetoric of the leaders, but also of many incidents happening. So it was a very, I would say, a terrible year in Greek-Turkish relations, 2022. So of course, if we compare 2024 with 2022, we see a very different atmosphere. And this different atmosphere happened as history sometimes repeats itself with an earthquake in Turkey in February 2023, where the Greek government sent a lot of rescue teams. So there was a kind of revival or reminiscence of what happened in the past. And it was a first change of climate. And then in Vilnius in July 23, there was a first meeting of President Erdogan and the Prime Minister Mitsotakis, where they decided to turn the page and start a new phase of rapprochement. Of course, at this time, they both had won elections with a comfortable majority, so it was more easy for them to do it, and there we see how this also plays very much a role, the internal political condition. That was a good moment because both just came out of elections and they were both secure with their majority. So now we have almost a year and 2 months from this first, let's say, new page, and so it's a time to see what had happened and how we can assess the results of this effort. So, one first important thing is, do we have less dogfights, less military activity in the Aegean? Because this was traditionally also more intense during the summer. Certainly we have. And this not only minimizes the risk of a dangerous accident, but also it has concrete economic benefits. For instance, if we compare with 2022, according to the Greek official data, there was a record of 11,258 overflights, and this costed Greece more than 27 million euros. Today, in many months, we see almost zero, and of course, also the cost has lowered a lot. So this is a very positive thing that we hope it will continue, because we know that the most dangerous thing is an accident that can happen in these situations. So this is a positive development. Now, do we see a cooperation on the issue of migration? Migration was also a very thorny issue, in particular after the Evros incidents of 2000. And it was something very difficult to handle. But we see, and according to the statements of both ministers of both countries on this issue, there has been control, a containment of the flows, and also an open line between ministers of communication, and also some initiatives to have some, let's say, common programs around, coast guards and people who are working on the ground. So, although this is a difficult problem, we don't know how it will go, because more challenges are there to come regarding migration. At least it has been improved. Now, if we see the political atmosphere, we see that the rhetoric has changed a lot. Less inflammatory. We see that both leaders, they avoid replying when one of them says something the other doesn't like. And this attitude has changed the whole political climate in general. So what we see in both countries, also if you see among the other political leaders, the member of parliament, and the public discourse, it has changed from what it was 2 years ago. Now, do we see an increase in economic cooperation? There also we see an increase. We don't have the very recent data because the last official data are from some time ago, but we see that there is certainly an increase, and there is a joint goal from the two sides to achieve a trade volume of $10 billion. Also, a Greek-Turkish Business Council was established. And in the past, this council had played an important role because, of course, it had some people who had also a vision, and they were, let's say, more than business leaders. So they wanted to invest in personal relations among people who have common views, and also they provided some practical ideas on how to resolve problems. Now, it's a new thing. We will see how it will go, but it's also, it can bring some results. Now, do we see increase in tourism? Absolutely, because we saw, for instance, the measure taken by the Greek government to give extended visas on Turkish citizens on arrival in some islands has almost increased the visitors by 100%. So there also we see an increase. And also, at each meeting, we see new agreements being signed. More recently on cooperation on natural disasters and health, which are two very important sectors. But let's say from the Greek-Turkish Forum point of view, something we are saying is that it's not enough to just have, bilateral agreements. You can have a full list. The point is, what do you do with them? Do they, let's say, how they are monitored, if they have concrete results, and how you can help to make them more relevant. Also, another development that I should also mention is the participation of the Turkish foreign minister in the Gymnich meeting of the EU. That was also something new, something that shows that also in the EU level there can be an opening to discuss some of the freezed chapters, and it gives also, let's say, a perspective. So if we see it overall, we can say that it's true from 2022 until now, there has been a big change that we can, let's say, measure in different fields. But the big question for everybody is, will it last? And how long it will last? So I will end here.
Great, excellent use of time, Paulina. Of course, I should have mentioned earlier, Paulina is among many other titles. She is the coordinator of the Greek coordinator of the Greek Turkish Forum. I'm on the opposite side, Turkish coordinator of the forum. So we regularly talk on issues related to Greek-Turkish relations. So, Gülden, another longtime friend and also veteran of Greek-Turkish relations, so much so that she just told me a few minutes ago that she's now bored with Greek-Turkish relations and went to easier relationship like Afghanistan-Pakistan. Dealing with that. So, Gülden.
Many thanks, dear Professor Mustafa, and I would also like to thank all the organizers for inviting me. Let me start by defining, conceptualizing Turkish-Greek relations. Turkish-Greek disagreements over the Aegean can be conceptualized as territorial conflict. The issues are about sovereignty. And in IR field, we see that territorial problems are the problems that are mostly likely to develop into crisis and also, unfortunately, war. Why it is so? Because of the obvious reason that to make any concessions regarding sovereignty issues also means that you are going to make compromises about your identity. So it is very difficult, and it comprises thorny issues. The state of our relations, one of the determinants of our state of affairs is power relations, and we see a kind of power balance between the two countries. In this regard, I am not only considering traditional, tangible elements of power, but we should also add the support given by allies in the international arena, as well as political society in the society. So there's kind of balance between different components of power. What is the result? The result is that none of these countries are in a position to impose its individual will to the other. And we are in a state of frozen relations. I will come back to that point later on. Another determinants of our relations, and today this issue is much more important, the interference or the influence of external actors. In the past, we know US mediation and EU factors, especially for the benefit of Greek Cypriots. However, today there are risks and dangers coming from the competition of major powers, as well as major power, regional power, frictions and competitions. However, we all say that today, in spite of all the issues that are still affecting our behavior, we are enjoying an environment of positivity. What are the basic components of this environment? First of all, measures with regard to crisis avoidance that target the prevention of an uncalculated, undesired, unintentional war. And secondly, several mechanisms established for confidence building. We can easily remember that the first set of conflict resolution measures introduced just after Kardak IMEA crisis in 1996. However, we should also see that dialogue and cooperation that we experiment today, this kind of environment, is not a result of CBMs, and we still have exploratory talks, or in other words, pre-negotiation stage in order to reach a durable conflict resolution over the Aegean problems. This positive agenda built during, this positive agenda developed because of some developments. First of all, there was a tacit agreement between the two states. The agreement for the Greeks included, it is lifting, it is a veto on Turkey's EU process. But on the other side, it is less mentioned, but on the other side, Turkey refused to build a crisis because of the Öcalan's capture in Kenya, and didn't internationalize this support at the international level. Afterwards, another factor which, in my opinion, made Greece more favorable to cooperate in the area of tourism and enhance Turkey-Greek cooperation in other areas as well is the Greek economic crisis. I remember once upon a time we were waiting in the long queues in Istanbul, having a visa, and a friend, a Greek friend working at the consulate told me that they are watching and laughing how many people are suffering at the hours like beginning with at 6 in the morning. And they are not happy that so many people would like to visit Greece, because they were regarding this a kind of invasion. But today, many things, especially in the civil society, change, that we all enjoy going to Greece, and Greece facilitates Turkish people's desires to come to their country. Of course, another factor is Turkey's shift of attention to the Middle East problems, and Turkey in the beginning of 2000s initiated and adapted a new vision towards the Middle East. With this spirit, many agreements signed between Turkey and Greece. I really value these agreements because we often emphasize empathy. And many workshops in Greek-Turkish affairs happened in the past and still happening in order to facilitate empathy. But the brain studies tell us that it is impossible to empathize each other's pains because each party perceives what is happening from his or her angle, through the experiences it has. But because of these cooperative agreements, it means that we have entered to an era of cooperation, and through working relationships, through growing working relationships, we can easily establish, build a third culture, neither Greek nor Turkish, but another one built on our own experiences, but together. Of course, as mentioned, not only recent earthquakes, but the earthquakes in the past that devastated both countries became a factor that weakened historical hostile images, especially at the societal level. All of this happens without reaching a compromise in the thorniest issues. Though we have reached a point of minimum trust, a minimum trust is different from a real trust. In our culture, we say that you can turn your back to a friend. It is not this kind of trust, but minimum trust means that each party knows the other that it also needs to cooperate for different reasons maybe, but there is a sense of acceptance of the needs, so they cooperate. We achieved minimum trust, but we still need to build real trust in our relationships, because we cannot let the issues remain frozen in the future. Why? Because like bacteria, they can evolve into different problematic issues. New issues emerge. The most important ones, besides migration, is the one.
1 minute.
Okay, the one that many of us expected more cooperation is the energy field. In spite of our expectations, the energy exploration discoveries in the Eastern Mediterranean became another problem area in Greek-Turkish affairs. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Now I go Dimitrios Triantafyllou. Right? Yeah, Triantafyllou.
We know each other for so many years. He still gets my last name wrong, but it's okay.
Well, it's 3 roses, right? Off the roses.
Of the rose.
Well, Dimitrios is somebody who has spent more time living in Turkey than in Greece.
Yeah,
Right?
it's true.
So is now in Greece considered as a Turkey expert. Of course, a member of Greek-Turkish Forum as well. So let's hear what Yari is going to say.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, and I'd like to also thank the organizers for inviting me to this important event. I mean, it's interesting. Here we are. You know, I've been coming to Cyprus many times. My third time this year, but I had never come to the Ledra Palace, and I kept thinking, you know, of the events of 24 on July 1974, and here we are talking about peace, the way forward. So it's a marked change. Then I was also thinking about, given our neighborhood, I kept thinking about, President Carter, right, in 1977, visiting Iran. He had said that Iran is an island of stability in one of the most troubled areas of the world. He also said that the Shah Pahlavi is also loved among his people, of course. But Greek-Turkish relations, in that sense, are also a portrayal of an island of stability. If you move forward 50 years to 2024, in a very troubled area. And in fact, Greek-Turkish relations are a paradigmatic, given the wider neighborhood. And even 2024, it's an anniversary year, 50 years since the tragic events in Cyprus, 50 years since the return of democracy in Greece. So it's very interesting how it's paradigmatic, because even though there's a lack of trust, and I agree, and every time we're trying to rebuild trust, we've always maintained contact. And one of the things that has been happening is we have avoided dehumanizing each other, as many others do in this part of the world. Right? We have always maintained contacts to the point that non-Greeks and non-Turks are always surprised that we talk to each other, even in difficult times. And I'll give you a personal example. Some of you might have heard it. It was 2000. I was working at the EU Institute for Security Studies in Paris. I and a Spanish colleague, Martin, we were invited to attend a German Marshall Fund meeting in Istanbul. And Martin, my Spanish colleague, comes to my office in Paris and goes, "Dimitri, do we need a visa to go to Turkey?" I said, "Martin, I don't need one, but you might need one." If you don't need one, you're the Greek, I don't need one. and you know, he says, "You're always making jokes, Dimitri, whatever." Martin never takes care of his visa. We arrive at Ataturk airport, passport control, I allow him to go first. And then there's that, you know, the officer telling him, "Go get your visa." Martin is shocked. I said, "Don't worry, I'll wait for you." Martin gets his visa, comes, we pass through passport control, and then next shock, these pillars out there with huge banners, Greek and Turkish flags, because it was the time when Greece and Turkey were bidding together for the European Football Championship that we never got. But he turns to me and he goes, "You guys, you, meaning Greeks and Turks, have been joking with us all these years." I said, "No, you idiot. We've been talking to each other. It does not mean that we don't talk to each other. Yes, we have differences, right?" And this is always telling of the relationship. And the fact that we've managed not to dehumanize each other is important. And because you talked about empathy, it made me think of another personal incident as well. So until last summer, I was living in Istanbul, and obviously I was there during the earthquakes last year. And I remember a couple of days after the earthquakes, I go to work out, and my personal trainer, Esra, is telling me how, you know, she's having nightmares, she cannot sleep at night, she stuffs herself with food, and just in case something were to happen, because the hysteria was an earthquake will hit Istanbul, it's still there, right? And she goes, "Dimitri," and that shocked me, I got chills. She goes, "All I know is if something were to happen and there's an earthquake, and if I'm to be saved, I hope it's a Greek that saves me." You know, and it's the memory of the 1999 earthquakes. And so the empathy is there in that sense. I mean, it's chilling to hear this. I go, "What are you talking about?" That's it. But she meant it, right? She goes, "Because this is what I remember." So this is, you know, important in our relationship. On the other hand, there are differences in how we interpret things. And I think one of the things is, because I hear this argument always in Turkey about the lack of foreign actors in the process. There have always been foreign actors in the process. Always. And it's not just the EU. The US has been a crucial actor, and we're in the midst of strategic change. And I always see this because, you know, strategic change happens over the long term, over decades. 1954, Celal Bayar, the president of Turkey, is invited to Washington, and he speaks to the joint houses of Congress. And that's the start of basically the special relationship between the US and Turkey. This is from then on that Incirlik is built to the level that it's built, and the other bases and so on, at the height of the Cold War. 2022, the Greek Prime Minister, Mitsotakis, is invited. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. So there's always been, and from the Greek perspective, there's always been an imbalanced relationship because Turkey's always had the blessing of the US in that sense, right? And then in the Greek psyche, it's also the events of Cyprus in '74 and so on, which have always been misinterpreted. Because for the Americans, it was always about the Cold War and making sure that there's a NATO presence on the island. But we are in the midst of strategic change. And at a time when, because context is always important, because we're in a transactional or a fluid or liquid world, Turkey is also rethinking its priorities. It's with the West. It's also acting more autonomously. He wants to have a bigger say in regional global affairs. And the strategic change, which in fact has come around because of a growing lack of trust between the US and Turkey. And that's why the US might have been turning to Greece and other neighboring countries, right? Is also having an impact on the relationship. It allows the Greeks to feel a bit more secure in the way they would sit down and talk to the Turks in that sense. It's had an impact on Cyprus as well. I mean, it's so interesting, this country, the Republic of Cyprus, which has always professed support for the non-aligned movement, And I don't hear Akel protesting the fact that, rights have been given to US forces and French forces and so on. Obviously, this is having an impact on the relationship. And you add on to it, 20 years since Cyprus's entry to the EU factor, where now, whether willingly or not, most EU member states, and that's how the EU works, accept those two paragraphs that keep popping up in European Council meetings about the Eastern Mediterranean in general and the need for good neighborly relations and the Cyprus issue. And this was also sort of restated at the Gimnik when Minister Fidan attended. We cannot get around it, it's there. So there is a strategic rebalance which has to be taken into account, which might complicate things because it impacts on Athens one way, it impacts on Ankara in a different way. And so everything that has been happening, I think, has been happening and always been happening in Greek Turkey within that context, and it makes sense whether it's for Washington or other great powers, but even for the West in general, that Greece and Turkey trying to find a way to move beyond their differences. And so there's always been a degree of internationalization of the issues that is out there. Now, and so what does this mean? I mean, I have many things here, but I want to be short in the sense, because a lot of the things have already been stated. So the challenges that are present and how to deal with this, and obviously there's convergence on many issues. Irregular migration is convergence. Yes, it's not just a question of the way it's perceived, one country passing the buck to the other, which is what happened in 2015. There is a problem right now with what's happening in the Middle East. It affects both countries directly. How do you deal with it? And that's why it's so interesting that at least one of the conclusions of the recent bilateral meeting between Mitsotakis and Erdogan was that their relevant ministers, the Greek Minister of Migration and the Turkish Minister of the Interior, should meet. Meeting that, if they meet, it's going to be the third time they'll try to meet this year. But still, the climate crisis, every summer, it becomes more and more relevant. Mega fires that no country can deal with it on their own. The Europeans are moving forward with this civil protection mechanism, and in that sense, okay. In that sense as well, there is an attempt to see, and you see how every time there's a major natural crisis, each country is out, forthcoming. I'm willing to provide assistance, whether it's an earthquake or a mega fire and so on. So one has to look a little bit at the opportunities that exist. And that, I think that's where the focus is, even though we have not been able yet to move to the bigger issues, right? Because again, there's a difference of interpretation, of perception, of even the use of the term international law and how it's used. We see this. But the convergence there too is interesting because it's passed now in Greek public opinion that should there be no political solution to some issues, the Greek side is ready to accept adjudication, which is either the court or some other arbitration. And that's important too, right? And I think it's interesting that maybe Turkey is coming along in that sense as well. I could be wrong. But this is sort of where we are. But I really think the context and the external third parties are playing and have always played an important role. It's just that the balance is slightly shifting, and I think this is something that needs to be factored in how Ankara and Athens view the relations.
Okay, thank you, Dimitrios. Our last panelist today is joining us from what looks like a very nice office in Istanbul, no? Home, yes. On the Bosphorus, I presume, no? Okay, Nigar Goksel has been somebody who has worked on difficult geographies, I would say, and has dealt with difficult duos, like Azerbaijans, Armenians, and Greeks and Turks and whatnot. She's working now for the Crisis Group. And let's hear what she's going to say. Nigar.
Thank you so much. Everything that I wanted to say is already been said, so I'll just try to sort of put in some sort of, I don't know, maybe provocative points. Since, I was going to explain how domestic politics is one determinant and the Turkey-West relations is another, of when and how the sovereignty disputes between Turkey and Greece flare up, because the sovereignty disputes are there decades long, but when a calm phase is taking place or not often depends on those two pillars, let's say, domestic politics and Turkey-West relations. I mean, obviously there's an opportunity right now with no elections in either country for 3 years, because and as Dimitri mentioned, that it's possible that the two sides will put the more thorny issues on the table instead of kicking it down the can. Though in both countries it takes political courage of the leaderships to do so, because some type of compromise from the public expectation of their positions being verified is going to be inevitable. I mean, personally, I think, and I may be wrong, and that's why I'm opening it up to discussion, I think for the Greek public opinion, probably Turkey-related issues are even more mobilizable in domestic politics, and that might just be because Turkey has other more pressing threat perceptions and more diverse national identity shaping historical tensions with more of its neighbors. So, and I think it exists in both countries, but it might exist a little bit more in Greece, perhaps. And also another thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was the how the West-Turkey dynamic affects Turkey-Greece relations. It seems to me that when there's a crisis between Turkey and the West, it's Turkey-Greece relations that are the first to suffer. And again, something a little bit provocative. I mean, just introducing Ankara's perspective. From Ankara, the way you hear Turkish people in Ankara and some other places also sort of interpret it is that Europeans and the US exploit Greece's disputes with Turkey to put pressure on Ankara, and at the same time they'll opine that that Greece or the Greek diaspora leverages its close relationships with Brussels and Washington to amplify its standing against Turkey in their bilateral disputes. On the other hand, probably the way it's viewed from Athens is more that there's a totally different dynamic where they might see that Ankara takes its frustrations with the West out on Greece because Greece is right next door and it's relatively easy to stir up escalations with. So, that sort of chicken and egg, I think, that takes place between Turkey-West relations and Turkey-Greece relations is one I wanted to note. The migration issue has been mentioned, the US military deployment in Greece. I mean, I think that's something that's was viewed in a very negative light in Turkey just because they thought the way it was perceived in Turkey is Turkey draws boundaries to the United States vis-a-vis deployment against Syria or with, let's say, YPG or Russia or Israel. The more when Turkey draws boundaries, the U.S. deploys in Greece. But right now, it seems that U.S.-Turkey strategic mechanism is working well, and that sort of inflammatory element of that relationship seems to have calmed down. And similarly, I think there was a really unusual period when you think of after the coup attempt in Turkey from the failed coup attempt, 2016 to 2020, let's say. Both the nationalist hardliner empowerment in Turkey, the sort of trust problems with the West, coupled with the problems with Egypt and UAE, and that whole scene is really hard to replicate again. So I think it looks like the worst may be behind us, even if things get a little bit tense in future election cycles. I'll leave it here because everything else, like I said, has been mentioned. And thank you very much. It was wonderful to listen to you all.
Great. Thank you very much. This also helps us for the time-wise. Okay. In the second round, I will ask you even more brief, shorter, so that we can allow questions from the audience. What I would like to hear from you, okay, we all listened now. What are the parameters of the relationship? What are the impacts, and etc. So how do you assess the near and medium-term future of Greek-Turkish relations? And what would you recommend or advise to the governments, how they should go about solving their problems? Should they fight it over? That's a one way of solution. Or should they go into the business together or whatever. So let me start with Dimitrios. He's taking notes now. So.
I'm taking,
Yeah.
writing the questions. I'm not taking notes. Jesus. Okay, thanks. How do you assess the near and mid-future for Greek-Turkish relations? I mean, you know, what's going on right now, there is some sort of mechanism in play. I said we are trying to rebuild trust, right? I mean, we are way beyond the period of the rapprochement of 1999. It sort of ended. I was a product of the rapprochement process, being an academic, Greek academic in Turkey for 13 years. There are still a couple, but many of them special social scientists, right, have left. We're at the end of that process, and that's why we're trying to restart this. And I think it's interesting how both sides have taken a very structured approach that they started on the margins of the NATO summit in Vilnius last year. And actually, not only a structured approach, but a very quiet approach. I think we were all surprised after the meeting in Vilnius of President Erdogan, Prime Minister Mitsotakis, when their foreign ministers came out and said, you know, we have 3 baskets, we have this thing, we're going to meet in Athens, and we're going to build on that. And I think this is very important, that it's not just based on the meeting of the leaders, but the fact that other relevant ministers, government officials are meeting, that there is an advancement on 3 sorts of baskets, you know, the positive agenda and the political dialogue and the CBMs. And that's going on, albeit the fact that I think in both countries, every time something happens, whether it's a remark by a leader, or whether it's some other event that happened, you know, there are the naysayers, but they seem to become less and less relevant because they do not seem to affect the process as much. The 2 governments have decided to move ahead with this. And this has also multiplied. I see new things happening, but again, because we do not have a binding agreement, these are all political sort of things, right? Just like the Athens Declaration is a political declaration. It's set in, it's like it's built on sand in a way. Same thing happened with the rapprochement process. It was a political decision way back in '99 for, you know, to enlighten foreign ministers and then their governments to continue with the process. But nothing really came out of it, and it crumbled when push came to shove. And in this case, it's something to consider. I mean, I see now that there's more and more track 2 stuff going on. I mean, in the forum, we've been dealing with this in the Greek-Turkish Forum for a long time. But track 2, which is interesting, it has its own sets of problems, and I'll get to this. I mean, Mustafa and I do a young leaders events. Actually, I'm flying to Istanbul tomorrow. We're going to have our 10th young leader Greek-Turkish Young Leaders Symposium, where we have bring in together 15 young Greeks and 15 young Turks and talk about issues. But we've been doing this for 10 years, and never mind the difficulties in that 10 years process, where even in the difficult times, even during COVID, we did it online, now we're meeting in person, where we've tried without the support of our governments, and I think this is also something relevant, to keep this alive, try to find the funding each time we want to do this event, and keep this process alive with younger generations of scholars and experts and whatever, and people interested really in seeking solutions and in enhancing, improving the Greek-Turkish relationship. Now what we see as part of this more structured process is at the academic or track 2 level, more and more events happening with certain, sometimes I would say, think tanks of maybe dubious nature or very pro-government also leading the process, or media. And Mustafa and I have been talking about this, you know, whether we should continue doing it in our Don Quixote sort of way on our own, instead of being involved in these processes that are led by the governments, which sometimes can just as well stop because the governments decide to stop them, right? And I think this is also something to consider. I mean, how do you build a significant mass of people on both sides to keep this process of dialogue alive that we've been having? The other thing, too, is very paradoxical, because in these last few years, since 2020 and so on, what we see in Greece is also, you know, on the Turkish side, through its letters to the UN and so on, you know, doubting, where you raise doubts about the sovereignty of certain islands. And I think it's so paradoxical, and this is something to consider, that the very same government that has put that out there and to the Secretary General about purported Greek violations of treaties and so on, also agrees to having this visa-free status for Turkish citizens to visit 12 islands, out of which a lot of them are the ones that are disputed by Turkey, where Turkish citizens that have been coming in the thousands to the island of Lesbos and Samos and Chios have to go through Greek authorities to visit the island. And I think this is whether this was something that was thought out or not, it helps the process. It helps the fact that societies want the greater interaction. And I think we have to come up with these sort of mechanisms, just like, interestingly enough, Paulina mentioned it, especially when it comes to the positive agenda, which is economic. We've always had some sort of business council, but this is a new revamped one because the old ones seemed to be too parochial, seem to have failed. And the fact that there's a new dynamic being created is interesting, just like what's interesting in this, because not much importance had been given for a long time. Now the objective is bilateral trade to reach 10 billion in 5 years, whatever it is. It used to be 5 billion before, but even during the worst period of the crisis from 2020, 2022, bilateral trade was imbalanced, more in favor in Turkish, but it kept rising. So there's also that dynamic of the business world, understanding the need to interact with each other. And I think this is something that's been brought up. And I think the fact as we try to become more comfortable or trust is being built, it allows for forces and processes that are not necessarily led by the two countries to cement the relationship. And I think we need to continue supporting this sort of processes, right? I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. I'll go to Istanbul, Nigar.
You surprised her as well.
Yeah, of course, that's my job. No, I won't allow sleeping on the panel. Okay, what do you see for the future?
I was going to mention that since the geostrategic scene is one of the potential spoilers, maybe we can also look into the future as to what kind of disturbances might come and how Turkey and Greece their relationship from being too disrupted by potential developments. One thing coming up, of course, is the US elections. Linked to that is the future of European defense, whether the EU will find a coherence in foreign policy besides what it has currently vis-a-vis the Ukraine war, is a factor, I think, in the relations, or how the larger power rivalry evolves is too. Turkey-Greece is also sort of a positive node when we think of the potential connectivity between Asia and Europe. So I think there's both opportunities to turn the Turkey-Greece segment of a larger picture into a positive one, as opposed to a fault line between geostrategic blocks or civilizational blocks. I think that's sort of one thing that we should keep an eye on, as well as, of course, the political appetite in European capitals to engage with Ankara meaningfully. I think that's also something that's linked to European domestic politics and that can be decisive in the future of Turkey-Greece relations in some ways. Of course, there's domestic politics in both Turkey and Greece. I think this toxic narrative or rhetoric issue has been mentioned. Obviously, it makes a big difference when the two sides don't inflame each other with discourse, unfavorable discourse. Unfortunately, I'm not an international law expert or a historian, so I will refrain from getting into the weeds of what a reasonable or legitimate solution might be to the sea and air sovereignty disputes. But putting that on the table and finding creative ways to resolve it, maybe not quickly, but putting it on a path, I think is also really important, because otherwise it can always be rehashed when there is a will or either from external actors or domestic.
Okay, thank you very much. Paulina?
Yes, so that's a difficult question you are putting. The first thing that I wanted to say, and we have said it many times in the Greek-Turkish Forum, is that this positive agenda should be resilient. And resilient means a lot of things, because I said, what has been done, it's a lot, but much more can be done. And for doing so, you need to have the right mechanisms of problem solving, of following up. And also, we must always have in mind that the two countries have very different systems, bureaucracies, ministries. So this is very difficult, because you can have, bilateral agreements by very different, let's say, authorities, and very different legislation and systems. So it's not so easy, and if there is not an investment on trying to see how you can implement the different decisions, because also there people change, also in lower level, this will be a problem in the future. So it's something we need to take into account. Also, I believe that we should take advantage of this period of, let's say, better relations and calm to try to achieve broader consensus inside each country, meaning that we should not look only into the governments. We should also try to have a consensus with opposition, with different groups of the society, and also bring society into this. And there you have, of course, also the role of the media, the role of social media. We see how much misinformation, disinformation can change the whole, let's say, atmosphere in a day if there is something goes wrong. So also these things need to be taken into account carefully. What I see is that what we are lacking a little bit is a vision. I don't see any vision. I see, let's say, a pragmatic approach, but I don't see any vision. And because Dimitrios said it before, come on, we are at the Lydra Palace. We are, where history is, the wound of history is here. We are in a place, everywhere we go, we see that, the divided place, the memories, the wounds, the tragedy, the military, part of that, it exists. So we cannot, say we forget this because nothing happens, and we continue to see what are we going to do as civilized. I mean, it's not like this. We must see the realities, and we must see how fragile it is. And in this, I must say, I differentiate myself from many other analysts by saying that to me, the Cyprus issue is more important than ever at this moment, because we must see the whole environment. It's very close. It's half an hour by boat. So what's happening, it's very serious, and we cannot put it totally out and say, okay, we're going to see the Greek-Turkish relations, and we don't see what's happening around us. It will be very wrong. And I think that this is also something that needs to be discussed in Cyprus, but also among Greece and Turkey, and finally, to have a kind of regional approach, because after all, it's not the case, which power will influence or wants to pressure us or to blackmail us or whatever. It's our own, let's say, vision for our own region, and from this depends our, let's say, well-being, our lives, our economies, and all those things. And there is a series of threats that are very important, but also a series of positive things that can happen. So in this context, I'm very happy that at least, there is a meeting the 15th of October between the Turkish Cypriot and the Greek Cypriot leader with the UN Secretary General. Perhaps, I don't know where it will lead, but it's something. And I think that any effort should be really actively supported. Now, a final point is that because we know that in the Greek-Turkish relations we're always, we stop at the thorn issues, because the others we can discuss, there are the thorn issues. There is a question and discussion now, at least in Greece, if in the next meeting and the high-level council, they will start to discuss about some of these issues. And of course, it will be in an exploratory way still. And there, what I would like to say is that, first of all, in any discussion of the sort, we must not get rid of the experience of the past talks. We had a very long, let's say, series of exploratory talks. We know some, let's say, points of agreement. We know some red lines. And this should not be, put out of the conversation. And also by, let's say, widening the agenda too much, it will not work. So this is something to take into account. And the second thing is that who is going to do this dialogue? Because if you put it, let's say, at ministerial level, it will never work. And at the moment, there has been no decision of any other body that could help this type of dialogue at another, let's say, level. So I don't know what and if it will happen, any progress in this part. But I think that in any case, in whatever happens, we need to act, take into account the regional and urgency and, let's say, the possibility to do things that are stable, that give us, a possibility to have some years of more stability, more calm, and then we can solve more problems.
Good. Thank you very much, Gülden. Finally.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think what we need for the future, even in the middle term, is not only a shift of paradigm, but a change of identity. And in this respect, unfortunately, a great opportunity was missed due to the refusal of Annan Plan. Today, both countries, including Cypriots, we are facing many probable dangers, and there are many risks. We are living in a very dangerous world. And in this vein, I can think about the peace era between the two world wars, between Greece and Turkey. We need political leaders to understand that we need to de-escalate our crisis, not exaggerate our problems, but we need to work together. We need to have more political dialogue between the two states and also between the two sides of Cyprus in order to prevent the spillover effect of the Middle East crisis. It could sound naive, but there are some signs of it, like Turkey, of course, from different angles than Greece, is very much worried about what is happening in Lebanon. And Cyprus became a key country in order to help foreigners evacuate from Lebanon. So both countries, in a way, have serious concerns about Lebanon. And we know that today, repeatedly, Hezbollah threatens Cyprus. And Cyprus is not a big geography, and I'm not from military. I cannot visualize what kind of strike it could be if they are telling the truth and if they are very serious about that. But it would, of course, have an impact to Cyprus in general. So we need a different type of dialogue nowadays, besides confidence-building measures or crisis avoidance, but rather to concentrate on crisis around us, not between us. So my proposal could be this one. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, good. We have 31 minutes, which is what we aimed, 1 minute more than what we aimed, so it's great. Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I'll ask. That's gentleman at the back, yes. Do we have a microphone or they just ask? We can hear them. Yeah? Okay, yes.
Okay,
Who are you, please, first?
James Kalenzi, and so worked on Greek-Turkish relations for many years, and lovely to see Paulina after so many long time. Well, in fact, so many of the panelists. I guess as somebody who, as an outsider who's looked at this relationship for a long time, I was struck by the news this week, which was reported very excitedly internationally, that Greece and Turkey have agreed to talks about talks. And you'll forgive me a wry smile to myself, as I thought, you know, this has just been what we've been hearing for years, talks about talks. It just seems it's a little bit more focused, the talks about talks. And I guess looking at the nature of the relationship, and I'm thinking of another problem that Greece had for many years, which was finally resolved, which was, of course, the Macedonian name issue, where there was a very clear sense of what the solution was going to be. But it was years and years of talks that never got anywhere. And finally, you had a political figure who said, I want to solve this, and made the running to get that solved. And I'm wondering, in the case of Greece and Turkey, what would it take to find the political leader who's going to do that, as the first question. The second question is, what is the logical solution that you would find on the Aegean and potentially sort of the wider maritime issues? As I say, you know, the ultimate settlement in the Macedonian name issue was something that all of us who'd been looking at it for many years knew was the logical outcome. It might have been a big surprise to many people in Greece and in North Macedonia what that solution was, but it certainly wasn't to anyone who'd looked at it. But I'm just really not quite clear what the thinking in Greece and Turkey would be to a logical settlement. And if I can just slip in another question, and Paulina, you raised the point obviously about Cyprus, and I remember when we worked on the Greek-Turkish Forum many years ago, I was actually the first coordinator of it as the outsider in a very junior role at the time, but it was wonderful working with them. Cyprus was very much off limits at that point. It was, you will never get anywhere talking about Greek-Turkish relations when you bring in Cyprus to it. Where do you feel today it sort of fits into the whole debate? And how salient, how important is it? So sorry to sneak that question in.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Before giving the floor, I think insiders do know what's the solution, logical solution is. The real problem, the real sticking point is your first question, actually. Would there be leaders who would take the political risk? And my question, an added question is, are Erdogan and Mitsotakis those leaders? Or we need some more time to leaders to come? Who wants to take up the challenge? Dimitri, you are looking at me. You want,
Sure. You know, very, very quickly, because, you know, even when we come to the name issue, Macedonian name issue, we shall see how resilient this deal is. The Greek leader, you know, took the political will just like his counterpart in North Macedonia, but, you know, in a very divisive way. And Paulina alluded to public opinion. I think times are so different today that the leaders, even if they are forward-looking, have to deal with the public opinion. In that sense, Venizelos and Ataturk had an easier time, different circumstances. But it was more top-down, where leaders were necessary. And I think this is a complication here. Here we have, potentially in the Greek-Turkish case, two leaders that, yes, the political calendars help, we heard this, you know, that seem to be willing. But it's much more complex than this, I think. And societies need to be on board, because both in the Macedonia name issue, questions of identity came up, and that creates dissension within societies. And here, too, you have, you know, this ontological insecurity fears because of the way the history of one country is so much bound to the other, and still is. And I think it's not just a question of leaders anymore. I think it's a question of making sure that there's societal support. And societal support means consensus across the political spectrum. That's one way. But I think you need to include other elements. Otherwise, and that's why in the Greek-Turkish case, I think it's positive that the mantra, at least from the Greek government side, that has been, it's been there for a long time, but now it's standard. we go to the International Court of Justice or we go to arbitration, seems to have been accepted by public opinion. Because it's also a way of saying, we cannot find the solution. We know what the solution is, but politically it cannot be solved, and therefore finding a way to go to a third party and accepting whatever the verdict is, right? I mean, that's my short reply to your thing.
You both said, we know what the solution is.
We are not going to say to you. We are not going to say the solution to you.
Can I say something?
Okay,
Yeah.
Paulina,
Yes,
sorry, I'm coming.
What I wanted to say is that, first of all, about the Macedonian name issue, I think it's a very different problem, because Greece never really felt threatened by the so-called Macedonia in terms of security, military way. So it was not, it was mainly an identity issue. And if you see the Greek history and the civil war, it was not by chance that it was a leader coming from the Communist Party and the left that took the initiative. So it was all related, has an explanation historically why and how and it happened and by whom. Now, regarding the Greek-Turkish relations, I think that the issue of security is very important. I mean, in Greece, main citizens feel really threatened by Turkey in terms of size, in terms of population, in terms of military capacity. So this is a real fear. And for any leader, I think that if he wants to take the chance, he needs first to make a resilient positive agenda, as we said. You need to build consensus, have a vision with a win-win scenario, and then you can have it. And I mean, we all know what is the solution. This is not the problem. We all know.
She also knows.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is a group of people who are not sharing information. Yes, Lady Anna. Could you come a little bit up front? We are not.
We can't hear you very well.
I was part of an initiative that used to bring together teenagers, Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot, Greek and Turkish. We used to have a peace camp every year where we Greece, Turkey, West Cyprus. I wanted to know, you said you did something similar with Greek and Turkish doing their leadership courses. Were you able to sustain, our problem was money and sustaining the relationship and following up. Were you able with
This is the tent.
You can.
Were you able to create a network? Because I think creating a network of young leaders between the two communities is also very important, because it's a multiplier in the community. So were you able to create a network? You said you did it for 10 years.
Yeah, we're doing it. We are not 10th year. May I, Mustafa?
Yeah, please.
The two of us have been running this thing. I was the Greek, I'm the Greek, and he is the Turk, and we've been working on this. Yes, I mean, it's our own personal effort. Every year we have to raise money, whatever little money, to make sure we bring these people. Every year there's growing interest, right? To choose the 15 and 15 from each side, we have tons of application and good applicants. It's possible. You just have to stick at it. And it's true that over the years, a lot of our alumni or people that have attended the program have maintained and built their own little networks among themselves. I mean, you know, for us it's about, because we focus on 20 to 40-year-olds, which means they're either undergraduates, graduate students, PhD candidates, young professionals. Academically, for us, it's also important because we're starting to do this at our level to build epistemic communities, and we see more and more of them willing to write together on our issues, which is complicated, right? It's not easy, but also interact in different fora. And one of the most successful panels we have every year is the one where we invite alumni to speak. So, you know, we have one this year where it's 8 Turkish alumni that attended, I can't remember what year, and a Greek alumni, and to speak about their experiences, how this process, this thing that we've been doing has helped them, where they are today, and you know, what are the lessons they have, you know, they have to share with the new participants. So yeah, it's you just have to keep at it.
No, it's a great effort, and I think it's really important to get the young adults, the teenagers involved. But in most cases, there's a problem of funding.
Of course.
So it's really great to hear that you managed to maintain it and you keep on bringing back alumni to speak.
Yeah, but every year is a challenge.
Every year is a
is a challenge to find the new money. So if any of you have spare, please. Okay, let's have. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Ahmed, you have no questions? That's surprising.
Very surprised.
No? From the European Union side? No? All right.
May I ask a question?
But yeah, European Union, but in okay.
Do you think something concrete would come out of this declared talks on maritime boundaries, which is very
The question is whether anything would come out from this talk, supposed talk on maritime boundaries. The two leaders agreed to explore the possibility of this talk, so whether anything would come out of it.
for all panelists?
Yeah, my daughter actually asked me this, and I said, you know, in order to discuss the maritime boundaries, you need to discuss the ownership of the islands. That's another question.
Yes.
And then you start discussing that
All linked.
everything might be blow up. But no, I'm not. Let me not undermine the panelists. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
agree with you.
With all due respect, not maybe ownership, but the continental shelf problem.
In order to determine the continental shelf, you have to know which islands
package.
belongs to whom, and that's another dispute, right?
And I'm glad
Paulina?
Mustafa,
No.
I'm glad that we youngsters, we ask these kind of questions.
Yeah.
There are the related issues, you know.
Yes, related.
It was in the first, you know, exploratory talks. It said it was on the continental shelf and related issues.
I think that's a
Yeah.
that's a very clever way of
Yeah,
putting
yeah,
things.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
because if I'm not mistaken, if they say that they're going to start with the ownership issue, it will blow up. So saying that related issues, I think, is a clever diplomatic way. But whether we can make a progress, it will. Ahmed has response.
Yeah, no question actually, but to emphasize a point.
Nigar, if you have anything, just let me know. That I'm looking at it.
Emphasize a point that you raised before. When it comes to second track efforts, in fact, there are a lot of initiatives where they actually came very close, if not an agreement on what it is that the two sides can actually agree on. But at least in some of the second track platforms that I have been, I can tell you that they came very close to even agreeing on the coordinates of where the delimitation is going to pass, based on both UNCLOS as well as international customary law. But at the end of the day, it is up to the political leaders whether they have the necessary will to actually exploit those blueprints, so to say, that is produced by the experts in second track diplomacy. And I haven't heard the answer whether it's Erdogan and Mitsotakis who will do the job.
Paulina mentioned something very, many things important, but one thing is about the essence of time. Because what Ahmed has said about the second track is also true, I think, for the first track. Because in the first track, state-to-state discussions, we heard that number of times they came very close to signing. But the timing always was problematic. They didn't sign, waited something else, and the time passed, and etc. So today, as Paulina mentioned, they should be benefiting from the acquis of the previous negotiations, not start from the beginning, so not to lose time in order to use this 3 years efficiently, and then they might sign before the elections. Otherwise, we might lose another opportunity. Whether the leaders, nobody answered. I know nobody answered whether these are the leaders, but let's see. Yes.
So my question is, sign what? Because isn't the solution in a way the referral to the International Court of Justice?
So what
when
referral?
You don't have to sign anything except basically how would I say, the case that you want to send to the court.
That's the issue.
Because therefore somebody else will take the decision for you and you simply receive the
That's, yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to answer, but I know answer to that, but anybody? Well, answer is Turkey is not accepting that.
Yeah.
Solution for Turkey is not that, right? It's bilateral. So we are, yeah.
But even if you move beyond that, it's about the content of the referral.
Even if you
This
go
is where
to
the
the court, you have
differences
to agree on the content.
Exactly.
No, and also it is the agenda, to agree
Yeah.
on the agenda, because there have been difficulties in agreeing and not
I mean, you have to
including
frame the
new,
question very
issues and
nicely.
more issues. And I think that for both sides, still there is also the question on, how you sell it, that it will be perhaps a compromise, because even if you go to the court, you cannot be sure that you will win 100%, one of the two sides. So how do you sell to the public opinion and to the other politicians that we are perhaps aiming to a compromise, and people, they don't feel it's very urgent. We can see the urgency, but the everyday person doesn't see why they have to make compromise. If it's not, I would say, related to a vision, to a win-win scenario, to be explained. Otherwise, it may be difficult.
I don't know whether, I think my friends would agree, one way of, at least the road to solution, not the solution itself, is to at least agree on, quote unquote, smaller issues to clutter, took them away, and take the one issue which might be very key, critical, and most difficult to accept from the society's perspective as solution, to take that issue into the Court of Justice. But you cannot do that as a first step. It has to be the last step so that you can blame the third party for the solution that you actually agreed beforehand behind the scenes. So I think that's the road that everybody's somehow thinking, but it's a very tortuous road, right? All right, anything else? Going 1, 2, 3. Yep, yes, sir. Good.
Not directly related, but in terms of Turkey's future prospects for entering the EU, which are the conditions, what needs to change within the EU in the international scene for something like this to become more achievable?
Γιατί ζυγούρες, γιατί είναι σημαντικό.
Με αυτό.
Είναι πολύ καλό αυτό.
Nigar, this is your area actually, but did you hear the questions? You couldn't, right? It's about Turkey-EU relations, if and when Turkey. Could you?
Which are the prospects? Which are the requirements for this to be restarted?
Which are the requirements of Turkey to restarting its process towards the EU membership? What are the preconditions, let's say, or requirements today?
Membership is quite a far-off prospect, but even to do something like, the lower-hanging fruits would be things like upgrade of the customs union, which is on the thing that's most in reach, let's say, or visa liberalization, for example. Essentially, there's a checklist that is almost all aligned with. There are a couple of items left, but it's also a political will issue. I think, for Turkey, to tie this back to Turkey-Greece relations, I think as much as, yes, external actors, shielding the bilateral relations from external actors is a great idea. On the other hand, at some level, you could also conceive that a bigger sort of Turkey-EU framework of offering Turkey some kind of incentive that could make it easier for Turkey to make compromises on other files could make a lot of sense. And one of the elements there would be customs union upgrade. Of course, that would have to fold in Cyprus as well. So, there's some circles that talk about some type of a formula where, let's say, Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots go back to to formal talks with some face-saving way around the current problems. At the same time, Turkey opens its ports to Greek Cypriot ships, airspace to Greek Cypriot flights destined there, and customs union upgrade takes place in that kind of a positive environment where Ankara also has something to show its own people in return for what's going to be presented as compromises by the nationalist circles, could add momentum to Turkey-Greece relations and make the difficult decisions maybe easier. Membership is, that requires democratic standards, rule of law issues, and public opinion in various EU countries. I think it's really not in the cards right now. I don't think people are expecting it in either side of the equation. But there are things, like I said, that are more in reach. Also, strategic dialogue, I think, is something that the European partners and Ankara are really interested in. A sort of a realization that some of the big issues on the agenda, geopolitical, require European partners to work with Turkey, and Turkey might prefer to do case by case, work with Germany on one file, UK with another file. But I think there's also a realization in Brussels that might not be. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Nilgün, do you want to say something about this issue? Because you are the expert on as well.
Well, I'm hopeless in this case. Even though EU is now discussing about the strategic autonomy in defense, and Turkey has a lot to contribute to this, but the lack of mutual trust between the parties even prevents a cooperation, a structural cooperation in this sense, in defense and security. I mean, if you look at the conclusions of the last summit, if I'm not wrong, March 2024, I mean, the main condition for the EU to initiate cooperation with Turkey is for Turkey to create the conditions conducive for a Cyprus solution, with all due respect to the intransigence of Turkey before Anatolian. I mean, it's not only on Turkey to create the conditions for cooperation. And I'm afraid the relations between Turkey and the EU are downgraded to cooperation on migration and refugee issues. And EU started to cooperate with many autocratic countries for this, like Mauritania, Tunisia, Egypt. No matter what the regime inside these countries, no matter how they treat the irregular migrants, EU is willing to cooperate with them, and EU continues to cooperate with Turkey only in this area.
Okay.
I'll say more in our upcoming panel as an advertisement.
That's the advertisement. Okay, we have time for one more question. Let's, gentlemen, at the back.
I think it would help if we had a microphone because
We don't. Yeah, unfortunately we don't. Sorry. Do we have one more question, or we started late, but I'll try to finish early so that next panel, they're looking at me very eagerly. Let's. All right. Let me thank all the participants. Thank you very much for your efforts, and thank you for coming and joining us. Thanks.